Hello, I am Amy Sandler. I am so excited to welcome you all to today's live conversation with Farrah Mitra. Farrah is an executive coach, a radical candor coach, and creator of the Communicating Change framework, which we're going to be diving into today. How to communicate hard news in a way that's honest, that's human, and actually helpful. Whether it's layoffs and restructuring, whether it's performance conversations, big strategic shifts, Farah's work is all about making sure that we don't cause additional harm when change is inevitable. Specializing in leadership, communications, and people strategy, Farah brings over 15 years of experience as a Bain strategy consultant, also a people and culture executive at hypergrowth tech companies, and has clients that span the C-suite at Fortune 50 companies to small startups and nonprofits across a variety of industries. And I think most important, Farah totally gets it. She's been a leader, an HR leader in hypergrowth change environments. And I think one of the things that I love most is that she is laser focused on balancing results with pragmatism. But I say this as someone who's gotten to know Farah well these past few years because Farah is one of our Radical Candor coaches. She's a communication expert. She's led over 200 Radical Candor workshops. Most of all, she's someone I consider a friend, and a friend with a lot of wisdom that I know that you're going to really enjoy this conversation. Welcome, Farah.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you so much.
Yes, well, I'm so excited not only just to spend time with you, I always enjoy it, but you have developed a framework that I think is so helpful and actionable for people, something that they really struggle with, which is how do you communicate change? So please tell us, where did this come from? Where did the idea for the communicating change framework begin?
Yeah, so Amy, you would think I would give you a big corporate story, but honestly, this stems from two moments in my life. The first one was when we had our daughter. So in California, when you are over a certain age and having a baby, they do ask you to get some genetic testing to make sure everything's okay. And so we're going into the appointment. We are actually quite anxious about the whole thing. We sit down, Amy. I can remember the room. I remember the chairs we were sitting in. I remember the view out the window. And the genetic counselor is like ready to deliver her news. And she says to me, "You have a 1 in 290 chance of your daughter having a very severe birth defect, which is totally normal for your age and a 0.3% probability of happening." And I cannot tell you, Amy, like my husband's and I's, like our hearts fell through the floor. Like I can feel that feeling of anxiety in that news that felt so terrible. But if she had just switched that around, like this is totally normal for your age, this is a 0.3% probability that happens to be a 1 in 290 chance, everything would have been different. So in my mind, not only was that a bad communication, but it's one that has stuck with me for years. On the flip side, my husband Monty, he had a surprise open heart surgery, and it was a day before our wedding contract, before we signed the wedding contract. And Stanford Hospital called us in and they gave us the news. And you would think that it was so stressful. You would think like you're about to get married, you're very young, you're having this open heart surgery, and it wasn't. They delivered this with so much care, Amy. They knew we had a wedding. They recognized we had a wedding. Like, talk about care personally in the language of radical candor. They knew that. They empathized that this might be hard for us. And they were crystal clear. There was no wishy washy, maybe you do, maybe you don't. There's no anxiety because there was no uncertainty. They were clear on the why, the context, and what we had to do. So it's really interesting to me that while that should have been incredibly stressful, it wasn't, because they did a really good job. And I think the difference for me between these two examples is exactly why I care about communicating these big, hard things. I've been in hyper change and hyper growth environments and high performance environments. And if you're trying to be in a high performance environment, often even in tech where you're trying to create something that's never been created before, things are going to change on the weekly basis. I think that combined with these experiences I've had at work with a lot of change has just made communicating change so darn important to me.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for sharing about those really vulnerable and impactful moments. I think we can all relate from our own sort of whatever our examples of change. So,
Yeah.
if you were to say, what would it have looked like for that practitioner to have embodied both radical candor, care personally and challenge directly, and communicating change? What would you have wanted them to do?
I think I would have wanted them to keep the care personally short because I don't like I'm waiting on the news. I think they would say, "Hey, I know this can be anxiety producing for people, and I just want you to know, like, your tests are normal, right? There is a 0.3% probability that your daughter could have this birth defect. It's actually very normal for your age." And they could have said or not said the 1 in 290, right? Because I think what matters is that it was exceptionally small. So I think it's like flipping the script, and I think a lot of times in corporate stuff as well, people are always like, I can't do this thing, or I'm so sorry we're doing this, versus like, here's what I can do, here's what it will look like. The message can be the same, but like you said, how you emphasize
Hmm.
or your framing of something, it's not changing the message, it's just making the message land differently in a person's body.
That is Well, I just heard you say, like, how it lands in the body, and obviously both of those were really, you can still feel, I can hear and see that you can actually still feel what it was like to sit in both of those waiting rooms, actually the physical differences in your body. We're gonna get into your communicating change framework in a moment. So before we dig into it, first of all, what is it? Can you
Yeah.
explain just at a high level, and then we'll get into more details?
Yeah, so the communicating change framework has a few goals. The first one, which I think people don't talk about a lot, is I really want to give leaders more comfort and confidence. Because I think what you typically get is just a bunch of facts, and you get to go out and communicate that. So having that comfort and confidence, especially when you care deeply about your people, is super important. Second, I want companies to have forward momentum. There is a reason why you're making a change, you're trying to get to somewhere new. So that change is important. It is thought through, it is made. And I want to help companies gain that forward momentum. And then, Amy, I know you won't be surprised, but the thing that's very near and dear to my heart is how to give employees an exceptional or like a more positive experience, right? Like it might be tricky, but how can we get them the most positive experience possible? Right. So, through some layoffs, you'll see people complaining on LinkedIn, but this company treated me with so much integrity and so much respect that I wish them well. Right. And so I can't change the hard, but my hope through this is to change the experience of the hard.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, and I mean, so aligned with radical candor. Obviously in the book, Kim Scott talks about how when she had to fire someone, how they actually stayed connected, and it ended up
yeah.
being a really trust building experience between those people, and it feels very aligned with what you're talking about. You mentioned about comfort and confidence, and you might be given facts, but not much else. And so, why do you think this is something that we are just why is this not a skill that we have been practiced in? Like, why are we all coming from such a deficit with this, do you think?
I think a couple things. One, we're just always focused on the business, right? I think radical candor is bringing humanity to business and personal, right? There are these other things you can do, but this is my sense. My sense is a lot of this is in empathy and a lot of this is in clarity, right? When you have a big major business decision and you need to get it right, it can be hard to put empathy in there. It can be hard to put the skill in there because at the end of the day, you don't want to screw it up. So if you stick to the objective, and not the subjective, you have maybe a higher chance of getting it right in people's head, right? Like if I stay right to that technical message and there's nothing I add to it, then I can land it. But as soon as I add in the subjective, my sense is it feels riskier, or leaders don't know how to put it in. They don't know what they can say, what they can't say, so they leave it out. But Amy, the reality is like this is a skill, just like radical candor. This is a skill. So, for example, you can't say, I'm sorry, we're letting you go, right? That makes it sound like a mistake. That's probably not a good business practice. But I think you can say something like, I know this is hard for you. I know this is a hard experience. That's empathy. That's not going to mess with what you're trying to accomplish. In fact, I think it's going to help people to process that decision and move on and be supporters going forward. So I think it is a skill. I think we get scared of how to put that human element into business. And I think people's focus might be elsewhere. I think we're just laser focused on getting to the next thing. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I really see that. I also, I was leading a radical candor workshop a couple of weeks ago, and someone said, when they were introducing me how it's actually in the practicing of radical candor that we get more confidence
Yeah.
doing it. Very often we think like, oh, let me just get a little more confidence. And then once I get enough confidence and enough courage,
Yeah.
then I'll start doing it. And in fact, it's sort of the other way around. And it's actually through the practice. This is very similar. The other thing that you're naming is that I have found when people, we have this antipathy towards uncertainty and change. We're wired that way, of course, right, as human beings. So we have to outcreate that. And one of the things that I think you've done so well from your background as a process expert is you've created a process that gives kind of a scaffolding to support the more emotional, empathy based conversation. And I think it's having a structure that people can kind of hang on to gives them maybe some of that comfort and confidence that they might not have.
Yeah. I mean, plus 1,000, right? At the end of the day, in my coaching or in this style of coaching, the goal is to systematically know how to do something, right? And the nice thing is we have a system and we have empathy and we have clarity baked into the system, right? And I think the goal is how do you help people have that process? And we do that through the coaching, but then frankly, they get to walk away with something that they know how to replicate for themselves, that they feel more comfortable doing, that they've seen in the wild doing, right? And the coaching helps them get there.
Great. So you do this as a coaching process, but walk us through, let's say I'm just starting with you, you're my coach leading me through a difficult change process. Like what would the process look like?
Yeah. So there's two pieces to it. First, I'll give you the four pieces of the framework, and then we can get into how you execute it. So in the framework, there are 4 steps. So the nice thing is it's always 4 steps, and there is a client template that will help you think this through. So step one is you got to get the facts right. Step two is to check in with yourself and check in with your mindset because Amy, your people are smart, and however you feel is going to show through. Your emotions will always speak louder than your words in a situation like this. So if you are frustrated, you are dreading it, you feel guilty, people will know. So you got to check in with your mindset. We've got to make that shift. And then step three, you've checked in with yourself. You got to think about the other person. You've got to check in and think about what's going on for that person. And I'll give you a tip in a little while around thinking about what do you want them to feel and say afterwards. And then the last step is you've got to have a plan. You have to have a plan that doesn't just hit that one moment. You're not done, right? You got to support people in that moment, the moment after that, and the moment after that. So that's often shortchanged, but it's get the facts right, check in with your mindset, get in the right headspace, check in with how other people might be feeling what they need, and then make a plan. Those are the 4 steps in the process.
And you kind of have them go through these steps themselves in a template before they do the coaching. Is that the sort of order of
Yeah.
operations?
I'd say leaders spend, this is going to sound kind of shocking, but leaders spend 10 to 15 minutes in the template and ask them some good questions. We go into a coaching session together so they're prepared. I can be leveraged, I can read that in advance. We go into a coaching session together, and I will tell you, Amy, we spend the majority, and we can dig into this more, but we spend the majority of their time on their mindset. Again, because if they're frustrated, they're going to come across as frustrated. If they feel guilty, it's going to be guilt and wishy washy. So we spend a lot of time coaching on the mindset. We go through the 4 steps, but that's probably where we spend the majority of our time. Once we've unlocked the mindset, we're really together coming up with phrasing, like effective phrasing that not just will work, but frankly, like feels authentic to them and feels comfortable to them, right? The companies that do this are high performers. So you have really smart people. They're like, okay, got it. I'm not frustrated anymore. I want to be supportive. And they're generally off to the races. So, as wild as it sounds, it's usually like 10 to 15 minutes of pre work, 30 minutes together, and then they go off and make it happen. I've been surprised that it's usually a one shot conversation that's 30 minutes.
Well, I think people will be very happy to hear that because, we're all so busy. And I think very often when people think about things, especially around sort of emotions and communication and mindset, we think this is, a 20-year therapy project, which I'm also a fan of course, but like we gotta keep moving. And so you talked about, that step to checking in with your own mindset, whether it's guilt or dread. I'd love to hear some examples and maybe some folks that you've worked with where there was a shift. And from your own perspective, like what was it that enabled that shift in mindset?
Yeah. So remember, step one, get the facts, but step two goes right to you and your mindset. So in step two, the idea is no matter how good an actor or actress you are, it's going to come through how you feel. So the goal is to figure that out with that person. So I'll give you an example and then we can talk about how you could get to this in a coaching session. So in this example, I worked with somebody who lost a significant portion of their team. They felt terrible because they realized they could no longer service other functions, like they didn't have enough people or bandwidth to do that anymore. And the conversation was, how do I go tell this other leader who's my peer that I'm kind of not going to be able to help as much anymore? And so when I asked them about their mindset, Amy was like, terrible. I feel like my entire credibility will be lost. Like my whole function will be seen as like a little bit worthless, like pretty doom and gloom. And the communication they wrote out was doom and gloom. The phrases were, I'm so sorry, I lost all my people, I can't help. It was, and remember, these are exceptionally smart people. They want, like, that's how the person felt. So that's how they were going into it, right? And then we did the coaching. We're like, well, let's think about more what mindset you want to be in. She's like, well, what I want to be is a more strategic partner to this person. And I'm realizing, like, one, this is a business decision. Two, this is actually quite temporary. They realize like this is temporary, like things are going to go back to a different status quo. And three, I can still help. I have people, I can still be helpful, right? And so when we created that communication together, Amy, it was much more positive. It was more partner oriented. That question was, or that discussion, sorry, went a little bit more like, hey, as you know, we've all lost people. I still want to be a strategic partner to you. Let's sit down and let's talk about your priorities and figure out what we can get you. And for the things we can't, let's figure out a plan for those things. That's a much more partnership oriented.
Hmm.
Door is open, not closed. There's a place to go. Actually, when we came out of that conversation, she was like, this person was like, wow, actually, I am not worthless. I'm actually a pretty strategic leader. I'm actually being quite helpful here in a hard situation to come forward quite positively. So, like I said, one of the really amazing things is you see people come out feeling confident. You see them feeling comfortable, like, oh, I get it. Like, I get how to do this. And there's so mindset matters. And like, you get to have an impact on the person on the other end. We just talked about more of a corporate function, but there's also examples with performance review ratings and comp decisions and other hard things where you really get to have an impact on the person as well.
As you describe that coaching conversation and the sort of light bulb there, my experience is that very often these mindset shifts are because of a kind of embedded identity that we have. So I'm imagining this person that he identified as someone, I'm a leader, I take care of my team. If I've lost people, I've failed, and there's a larger identity issue. So it's sort of about my own identity and my own kind of needing to process that, right? And so part of what I hear is happening in the self reflection through the kind of question process you have them go through, and then the coaching is I first need to actually acknowledge like there's this piece that happened,
Yes,
and in the communication, let me now anchor more towards where I want to go. So I need to kind of acknowledge that this happened for myself, but as I'm communicating, I can communicate from almost a different level of identity.
100%. And Amy, I will tell you, when it actually, this happens in all different situations. Sometimes someone will start this call with just a cry. They just have to get out how hard it is. And so one of the things that I think they appreciate is that this is an external, like, safe space to do that. It's not, I have to cry with my HR person. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes
Yeah.
we can like hold back or feel bad if it's someone internally. So there's a safer space. But to your point, Amy, sometimes people cry. Like, they just need a space, like you said, to mourn or to grieve. And they just need some good questions to help them see it differently, right? So for me, it's like the question I ask is, first, I just ask, what's the worst thing about this whole thing for you? Like, what, just like you said, like, mourn it, grieve it, get it
Yeah.
out. And then I make it more tangible, which is, what's the mindset you're in? Like, give me the phrase backstabber. Like, I'm the one who hired this person. Now I'm a backstabber. I feel terrible. I feel frustrated. And then the magic question is, Well, how do you think that's going to land for someone if you come from frustrated? Or how do you think it's going to land for someone? Usually it's like sad or guilty or terrible. Oh gosh, I'm going to be wishy washy. And to your point, I say, well, where do you want to come from? Like, oh, I want to be, I just talked to someone the other day. They said, I want to be supportive, caring, and fair. Okay, if you came from supporting, caring, and fair, what could you say that's authentic? And it's like, if you think about the radical candor language that we use all the time, what I'm really trying to do is not just shift the mindset, but I'm helping them go from nice to kind because we can't change the situation. I cannot change if you're getting a performance review rating that you don't like or layoff or a strategic, that can't change. But we can change that experience for that person. Again, I'm being a broken record by helping it land, right? And that's the like going from nice can be confusing or nice can be hard and kind like, oh, I can come out and say, well, that sucked, but thank you. Like you're right. I get it. You don't have to like it, but you can feel good about how that landed for in your
Yeah. Yeah, and with that how that lands, even when people share stories of when they receive radical candor, it's not gonna necessarily feel great in that moment,
body.
right? It's sort of, "Yeah, that this sucks, we agree with that," and yet that is an act of compassion,
Yes.
that they were as clear as they could have been. I wanted to go back when you talked about the 4 steps, and the first one was around the facts, and sometimes it can be actually hard to get them,
Yeah.
and so I can imagine there's certain communications that need to happen where it's not crystal clear. Are we virtual? What's happening there? All of these different changes, tariffs, are we up and down? And
Yes.
so how have you found when actually the facts are not crystal clear for folks, how do you kind of adapt or flex your framework with that?
Yeah. So one, the good news is the template kind of makes you think it through. So the template will ask you the who, what, when, where, how. Two, I think part of it when you say adapt to me, it's like more coaching. So I'll give you an example. I had someone who had to terminate someone's employment. And in their get the facts right box in the template, they said both that the role was being eliminated and that the person wasn't performing. You got to know which one you're communicating, right? Not performing gives someone a certain message, knows that they didn't do well, that gives them maybe a place to grow and learn from. Ending the employment because you're eliminating the role is very different. Like, okay, well, they're different. And
Yeah.
what this person was doing was actually putting both in the communication, and that was wildly confusing. We had to really get to like, we got to pick a lane. We got to be really clear on which one it is. So I think the role again in the coaching can be to help clarify or to help point that out. Because if they wrote it in the template, they didn't actually choose a lane, right? They actually had both. So what were you going to say? Part of that to me is
Oh, no, what was sparking for me was my previous roles were in communication. I ran communications, executive communications at UCLA years ago and just had other roles. And what I have found in being a communications leader is that you often have to winnow through a variety of different perspectives and messages from different parts of the organization because finally you're the one that actually has to put it out there. And so when something is not clear, it becomes clear as the communications person that it's not
yes.
clear.
It also becomes if you don't get that clarity and it goes out into the world, that is just a hot mess and that's traumatizing. And then, but that's trust breaking
Yeah.
because then you're starting to pick a lane and figure out what it is and isn't, and you have to clarify versus like, this is the piece that we need to communicate.
Yeah. I mean, really, this is all about trust in many ways. And what I love, you're sort of operationalizing it, you're putting it into practice. What coaching tips have you found to help people pick their lane? Like, how do they know it's about the role being eliminated versus the poor performance?
Yeah. Are you asking how can they suss that out for themselves or?
Are there certain lines of inquiry that you found especially helpful to kind of coach someone to get more clear?
Yeah. I mean, I think one is what are the implications of each of those things? Because they start to see how different those implications are. What are the implications for that person or that audience or that group, right? What does that mean for how you have to handle the situation? I think often what you're doing is it's not, again, that the person isn't smart because that's not the case at all. It's just more you're being a thought partner, like you said, you're asking the questions to just get clear. And then this person will say, well, maybe we are eliminating the role, but at the end of the day, the person needs to know they're not performing. right? Like getting through what is that thing that is the most important thing when there is confusion. What is the thing that's at the forefront? And
Yeah.
actually, the other question is if you communicated both, what would happen? And the person's like, oh gosh, that would be wildly, I get it now. That would be confusing. And that lends maybe a little bit well to step three, which is understanding their needs and what they most need in the moment as well.
Yeah, let's talk about step 3. So we've worked on our own mindset. We've clarified the facts as best we could. Give me an example of step 3. Maybe we talked about a strategic decision or letting go of resources, but give me another example.
Yeah. So, Amy, first of all, gold stars for like knowing the steps. Good job. So, step three is it is just like I love step two and step three because step two, you're figuring yourself out. Step three, you're figuring out the other person, and together there is magic. So, a person who had to deliver a performance review rating, it was going to be a bit of a surprise. It was going to be not what the person was hoping for. And this person was dreading this conversation. They were worried the person was going to be very defensive. So, in step,
By the way, I think there's a lot of I can relate plus
yes,
ones.
this is a hot topic.
Yeah.
And the question that I like to ask, you've been asking about inquiry and good questions. The question that I like to ask in step three is because we're checking with the other person and what they need is what do you want the person to say and feel after the communication? So, in this performance review rating where they thought they would be defensive and it wasn't going to be a pleasant thing and everybody's dreading it, when I asked that, the manager said, I want them to say, this sucks, you're right, and maybe a thank you because this manager is not dreaming that we're just gonna yeah, it does suck. Like we have to be grounded in reality. So they wanted them to say this sucks because that's true. Like it is sucky, it's real. But they also wanted the acceptance of the performance review because they wanted the person to stay there and keep doing their thing. And so what you're able to do is when you know you want the person to say this sucks and I get it, thank you for kind of having my back and giving me this feedback, then you know two things have to happen if you're going to reverse engineer it. One, you want to be really high on empathy. So the empathy phrasing could be, I know this is really hard, and then maybe it's not what you wanted. That's being really high on empathy. You're going to hear a lot of like radical candor tie-ins here.
Mhm.
And then with the feedback around the performance rating, you have to be very clear. You have to be clear. In the words of radical candor, we take personality out of it. It is not personalized. It is very objective. It is very like you're optimizing for that feedback to land and for them to see it. So a lot of times what we'll do is say, what do you want the person to say and feel afterwards? Now, if you wanted them to say that, how would you reverse engineer this conversation? Versus, let me reverse engineer this. This is the outcome I want. This is the event. This is the mindset I'm going to come from. So if somebody wants to be fair, supportive, and caring, and they want the person to say, this sucks, but you are right. Thank you. Then you have like actually a really high probability of starting to phrase some conversations.
Yeah. I love, being an English major who also went to film school, but wished as I was better at process. I love this. And I'm wondering, one of the things when we do our radical candor workshops, Farah, as you know, we have so many great frameworks, but we don't get into too much scripting, even though people want us to give them the word. Just give me the words. But obviously, it's going to be so different because it's a one on one conversation.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing in your one on one coaching, which is a different sort of animal here, is that you are able to actually work with your coachee on some possible phrases that might get that person to it sucks and you're right or I accept it. Am I hearing that right?
Yes, and I forgot to give you the punchline of that story, which is the next day the manager did email and they did say, "Wow, this person said this sucks, but I get it."
Oh my god.
And I read the email and I'm like, "Nailed it.
Were they wearing it on their shirts?
Nailed it. Really nailed it." But tell me your question again because I got serious.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether that example or another one, for folks who are listening who are like, yeah, ooh, give me some of the,
Yes.
okay, yeah, I have a hard performance review. And obviously, we're not saying like use this exact phrase, but I would love to know some specific wording or phrases, especially with a tough performance review, so that it is crystal clear. What have you found works best?
Yes. So I guess a couple of things. One, stepping back, you asked if I give people phrasing. I do because this is hard. And I've done it for 20 years. I have that pattern recognition. Some coaches will only do inquiry based. I am kind of the rebel coach. I will help you figure it out for yourself. And I do have some expertise and experience that I feel comfortable and confident in that will help people. We don't have a ton of time. People are busy. So I do give people phrasing. And then I ask, how do you put that into your own, like, one, how does that resonate for you? Do you like it? Like, what do you like? What would you tweak? And then how would you put it into your own words? So we're not giving them the answer, but giving them a place to start and then
Yeah.
let them make it their own. Because at the end of the day, you can't use my words, that will not feel authentic. And this is a process about feeling comfortable, and comfortable is about authenticity. Phrases that help. I know this is hard. I think that is a beautiful, because you are not saying, I'm sorry you got this rating, because it's the rating, right? The rating is the rating. I know this is hard for you. I want to partner in your success and your development, because it says, I'm here by your side. I want to be helpful to you. The word partner is one of my absolute favorite words in the world, because it really shows that you're in it with someone versus them being alone in something. But I don't think you have to have a lot of phrases, because when you have a lot of phrases, you kind of start meandering and went
Yeah.
all over the place. But I think one thing that is also helpful, that I think is really something I learned in Radical Candor too, is after you've said your couple things, you also just leave space. What's on your mind? Like, how is this landing for you? Listen to understand, not to respond,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of themes that are similar. So I don't know that we need a ton of phrases behind like the empathy and the recognition and the partnership. But what we do need is to then give some air and some space as well.
Yeah. And what about in terms of the clarity? Because for some people, the empathy will come more naturally. For I will put myself in that category. But for me, where coaching I think could be helpful is in getting very clear on what am I saying of, in the last year, you've seen a decline by 20% of incoming leads or, whatever the issue is. So I'm just curious, how do you partner with the person to help them clarify their thinking and get to the actual delivery in a way that they can feel like, okay, I don't need to keep throwing more stuff onto it just to be as clear as possible.
Yes, two things I think are true. One, with the empathy, it is easier for some people, but sometimes they're nice instead of kind. So
I
sometimes
think that's a great
will
distinction.
I just
Yeah.
want to be clear, like, we can have empathy, but sometimes we will say, "Oh, and, like, I'm so sorry." That doesn't help. It's like, let's talk about, it's hard for them, right? So I do think sometimes we can be nice instead of kind. So I agree with you on the empathy, but sometimes I think we can confuse people and get it wrong there. On the clarity piece, I think a lot of the things I teach people are, well, two things. One is, Amy, it's gonna sound funny, but most people have it. Like, when they start telling me the thing, I just start writing down what they say, because they've got it. They're like, hey, I really care about this person and they have done well. And there are places that they need to improve. And here are the three places. I'm like, that was,
There it is.
yeah, there. And so they just start telling me all the things and they say it. They've already said the thing. And then when I play it back, they're like, oh, I do know the thing. Now, if they don't know the thing, I think some of the things I like to share, this is again tied into giving feedback, is like, you should use and. Like, there are things you do well, and there are things that can be improved. Like, the word but can be really triggering. So we'll capture some of those things. Or someone who wants to get promoted. I hear you want to get promoted, and I want to partner with you in that success or that development. Like, the way that I want to be most helpful to you is I want to come back to you with the expectations for the role, what's working, and where you still have left to improve, and see where that lands and what the next steps would be. Most people think that conversation is, you have to be like, yeah, let's get you promoted, or I'm so sorry. But you don't have to do that in that conversation. The conversation is, hey, I hear that you want to get promoted. I hear it's really important to you. So here are some really thoughtful next steps that we should go through. And when you have a structure like that, here's the expectations, here's where you're doing well, here's what you have left to improve on, that paints the picture in and of itself, right? And so I think people often in these coaching sessions, they're coming in with dread because they think it's all about the bad news and letting someone down. But if someone came out of a promotion conversation with me with that, I would go back to my friends and say, wow, that person's incredibly thoughtful. Like, they have my back. They're actually going to do an assessment of where I am. Like, that sounds fair. That sounds thoughtful. That sounds caring. A helper or a pleaser kind of will take us to jump versus to take a step back and think about how we can thoughtfully engage in these conversations in a way that doesn't feel like a letdown. It actually feels like a fair, thoughtful, supportive conversation. How does that land for you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's really all about kind of a reframe and a reset of, first of all, what do we really want to accomplish with this conversation? And what does success look like? And I think that almost redefine, oh, success is them saying to their friend, I'm so bummed. It really sucks. And I'm so grateful that Farah shared this with me in that way. Like I really did feel it sucked and I felt really supported.
Yeah. Or step three, actually, my manager's right. I'm not ready to be promoted yet.
Yeah.
And we're going for
Yeah.
the next round because we have three things left to do.
I see this all the time in our radical candor stories, that sense of like that got your I've got your back, we're in this together. The languaging, rather than, sort of you versus we, like we are in this together.
That is my favorite word.
You have worked with clients across a variety of different industries. And I'm just curious, like more on a shifting back from a personal level to a more company wide level, where the framework actually across the board made a difference.
Yeah, so there are a couple things. I use this a lot in my executive coaching. So it will hit every industry from a nonprofit to a big company to a small company because at the end of the day, Amy, this is humanity. So
Yeah.
we're thinking about humanity. Or I will have clients want to use this for their entire company. So I have worked with a company now for about 2 years. And what is going on with them is they know that change is constant. And so they keep me on and I am a consistent resource to their HR team, to all of their leadership team, any people leader, and actually any IC as well, to be able to come to me in that safe space. And what happens is, Amy, you'll see is it'll be comp season and I'll get a whole bunch of pings. And then it'll be performance review season and I'll get pings. Or an HRBP will go to an offsite and realize there's a strategic pivot coming and they'll tell that person they can reach out to me. And so what's nice is that you can do this in executive coaching in a one-off way, or you can create a resource for the leaders in your company to come when they need. And I don't, it's all confidential. I don't have to tell them who did. Like, we keep it a safe space, but it is what I love about this one company is they are giving their leaders a systematic way to do this. Because they're like, this is the best thing ever. I'm going to use this every time I have a hard conversation, or like, I know exactly how I want to do this in the future. Or, it becomes a part of their culture to know that one, their companies care enough to give them this resource, and two, to teach them how to do it. So I do
Yeah.
sprinklings of clients, or you can do this with a company, and then there'll be a workshop and things like that to bring it even more systematically at scale.
Yeah. And I think what's really important, what you're highlighting is that, we practice radical candor and ongoing feedback and sort of relationship building. And that's going to, ebb and flow in terms of maybe most of the time it will be slight adjustments or tweaks there, but then we will have some real change that needs to be addressed. And I think what I love about what you talked about with the company is that there will always be changes to discuss. There will always be these sort of bigger ticket items where we need to feel like we are resourced for those as well. And so I love that. It's like, let's plan ahead. Let's know that there's always going to be change. There's always going to be uncertainty. How can we support ourselves so that in that moment we're ready and resourced?
They're grateful to the company. They're like, this is so amazing that I have a place to go, that I can get this coaching and support. Because, Amy, this ties back to your first comment, which is this is a skill set. This is a skill that we can learn and we can get comfortable with, and we can get there over time to know how to do this on our own. But I do love that there's a structure and a process to get people there.
Yeah, I love it too. Before we close, I did just want to go back to empathy because, you had talked about your husband's open heart surgery, and we talked a little bit about empathy and sort of that distinction between nice and kind. But why still do you think empathy is so underrated in business?
I just think it's high stakes. You got to land that message. We have to make sure people know what's happening. Can't put anything subjective in there. Can't risk the message going wrong. That's
It's such a counterintuitive thing, right? We think the very thing that's going to make, and it's measure twice, cut once or something. We sometimes think that if we don't do it, it will be more effective. And then we end up having to
and we
clean up
know there
after.
is emotional fallout. We see it because I think every single one of us has a horror story about how something was communicated personally or professionally, and how it took a lot of emotion and time and stress and anxiety and uncertainty to get past that thing. And so if we can add some humanity to what we're doing, then actually everybody wins because, again, the leader gets to be more authentic. The company gets what it needs to move forward. It's treated people with humanity. They can process, they can move on. And the person gets to have a better, non damaging, non harmful human experience of hard things because change is just very, very hard. It's hard, and we cannot change the hard. this is just a way to change the experience of the heart, but there are wins for all that come out of it.
Well, Farah, I love this. Thank you so much for bringing so much clarity and humanity to hard changes. Before we head out, how can people follow up with you or learn more about your communicating change framework?
Yes, I will love to geek out anytime about this and support anyone who has this on their mind. But you can get me on LinkedIn. I'm super active on LinkedIn at Farrah Mitra, or my email is farrah@greenreadgroup.com. And Radical Candor has written a beautiful article on the communicating change framework that I think we can share as well out to everybody. So please do contact me. I really genuinely feel passionate about this and would love to be supportive to anyone who could use it.
Well, Farah, I love the conversation. We'll drop that blog post into the show notes. Heartfelt thanks for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and hard earned expertise. I love also just all the ways that you have helped both individuals and organizations. I think it all started on the back of a napkin, if I'm not mistaken. You have created a process out of really effective, helpful conversations. If this conversation resonated with you as a listener, please do share it with a colleague or a leader. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
So thank you.
Thanks, Farah. The Radical Candor podcast is based on the book Radical Candor: Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity by Kim Scott. Episodes are written and produced by Brandy Neal with script editing by me, Amy Sandler. The show features Radical Candor co-founders Kim Scott and Jason Rosoff and is hosted by me, still Amy Sandler. Nick Carissimi is our audio engineer. The Radical Candor podcast theme music was composed by Cliff Goldmacher. Follow us on LinkedIn, Radical Candor the company, and visit us at radicalcandor.com.